This is Ryan and Michelle, and welcome to the Celebrate MarriageCast, where we hope to restore and reclaim godly marriages through honest and real conversations.
Welcome to episode 28, and we have a special guest for you today. We have Kevin A. Thompson, who is a husband, a father, and a married life pastor at Bayside Church in the greater Sacramento region. He's also the author of several books that you probably have heard of. We recommend them a lot here at Celebrate Church. He is the author of Friends, Partners, and Lovers and Fearless Families. Kevin is passionate about seeing families thrive. He's originally from Arkansas and now in the Sacramento area. Kevin has been a frequent guest on Focus on the Family, which we heard he just came from today, so we're honored to have him here on our show now. Family Life, and he's also been featured in the New York Times. He writes at kevinathompson.com and changetheodds.com. He and his wife, Jenny, have been married for 24 years and have 2 teenage children residing in Auburn, California. Welcome to our show, Kevin.
Hey, Michelle and Ryan, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And is that true? You were on Focus on the Family this morning?
So, yeah, we were. And it's always fun to be with those guys and such a tremendous honor to kind of spread the message in that way. And we recorded it some time back, so I wasn't in Colorado Springs today, but it aired.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, very cool. We've had a couple of guests from their network on our show too, and such a great ministry too. So, and we're honored that you're back to back on Focus on the Family and now on the Celebrate MarriageCast. I feel like we're really going places, Ryan.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Kevin, again, thanks for joining us here. Maybe for our listeners, just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your family, and really kind of your mission and what you're doing.
Yeah, so born and raised in Arkansas and did undergrad work in Oklahoma and then graduate work in Alabama. Jenny and myself, we met while in school in Oklahoma, got married when we were in Alabama, and been married 24 years, have 2 children, an 18-year-old Ella, who is a senior in high school. She has Down syndrome, just accepted a position at University of California, Davis, where she's going to go to school next year at a program there that's very unique and very exciting. And then have
Amazing.
a 15-year-old son named Silas, who's a sophomore in high school, works at the church with us there at Bayside. So originally from Arkansas, pastored there, on staff for 19 years, lead pastor for 13, and then 2.5 years ago came out here to California, to Bayside, where I'm a teaching pastor and then also serve as the married life pastor.
Wow. What a huge transition to go across the country and to move your family, teenagers too.
Oh, there's no question. And you referenced earlier the book Fearless Families. It kind of tells the story of kind of our family's anxiety, mine specific, and our battle through that. And my wife often says there's no way I could have ever made this move had I not written a book on fear first.
Wow.
And so had to confront those, and it's gone very well. We're very excited where we are and grateful for where we've been and hopeful for what lies ahead.
Very cool.
Absolutely.
And we were saying earlier, even though you're from the South, there's not really much of a Southern accent that we're detecting here.
If you get me on my phone with my friends from back home, you can tell where I'm from very quickly, but I can get rid of it when necessary.
It comes out. Comes out. Okay, well, keep your ears open.
That's great. So we've asked Kevin to be part of the podcast here today because of his love for godly marriages and families. So Kevin, our church, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but our church is a big fan of the book Friends, Partners, and Lovers. But you actually have a new book out that we'd love to dive into here today, and we're gonna bring not only marriage into the conversation, but also parenting, families, relationships in general. So thanks again for being with us. And Michelle, let's jump in.
Yeah, we will put a link to where you can purchase this book. It's called Stay in Your Lane. It's Worry Less, Love More, and Getting Things Done. Kevin, would you just tell us a little bit high level about the book and what inspired you to write it, which we both have read and found it very practical and very helpful and such a great guide too, and just great illustrations in it as well.
Yeah, so for, I talked about being in Arkansas for 19 years. During those 19 years, somewhere along the line, I kind of created this basic framework by which I would lead individuals and couples through whenever they came to see me for pastoral counseling. So I'm not a counselor at all. I refer people very quickly. I always talk about how I'm a triage nurse. And so I will assess your situation and get you to the right expert quickly. But at some point, 15, 20 years ago, I just kind of got in this habit of, as people would be walking through their issues, I'd take a sheet of paper, draw a couple lines on it, write the question, what's mine, what's theirs, what's God's, and then talk about, hey, let's kind of get things in their proper category. And if that happens, it will show you what your next step is. Because so often when people came to see me, they were generally stuck. They didn't know how to take their next step, and what led to the phone call. And so for years, my wife has been on to me about writing a book on this because she thinks it's very practical. I always told her, look, it's 6 words. What's mine, what's theirs, what's God's. How can you write a book on 6 words? And finally, about a year ago, we got to work on it. And Jenny would say, only I would be able to do this. I wrote the book. Obviously, it's small. It's very compact. It's doable. But I wrote it. I read the manuscript. And she goes, what do you think? And I said, I think it's too long. And she said, only you could take 6 words and then write too many words about those words. And so it really is this kind of life practical kind of concept of whatever situation you're in. If you feel like anxiety is rising, this will help lower it. If you're struggling and there's friction in relationships, this will help clarify maybe why that friction is there. And then if you feel stuck in some area of your life, this won't show you every step you need to take. It will help you figure out what your next step is, and that then gets people moving.
Amazing. There's a point in the book where you say how you set the whole principle up is you ask somebody their permission first. You say, do you mind if I get a piece of paper? I want you to know, Kevin, that the other night, Ryan, do you remember?
Yeah.
I asked her daughter, we also have an 18-year-old, Ella, and I asked her, I said, Ella, do you mind if I grab a piece of paper from the printer? Did you know where it was going when I said that? And I put it on the wall and I drew the 3 columns and I kind of walked her through it. So in the book, which I love, is there's a really easy guide. It's super easy. The book is super easy to read. It gives you a diagram or really a visual, and there's 3 columns in there. So if our listeners can just picture, kind of like 3 columns or 3 lanes. Could you walk us through that visual, Kevin, and kind of tell our listeners about an overview of that principle that they're going to learn about in the book?
Oh, yeah. So I learned how to drive on the back roads of Arkansas, right? So the only piece of advice my grandfather would give me is keep it between the double yellow lines in the ditch. And then, 2.5 years ago, we moved to California. And the next thing I know, every day I'm driving 6 lanes of interstate one way, 6 lanes of interstate the other way. And what amazes me about that is not the moments I'm stuck in traffic, because we all understand when things break down and they don't go right. What amazes me is whenever things are going well. How many cars are moving? How many people are moving at a tremendously high rate of speed with such great proximity? And do you know the technology that we have created to make that happen? It's paint on concrete. It really is simply some dashed lines that if you know that the other person is going to stay where they're supposed to be and you know you're going to stay where you're supposed to be, you can basically move as fast as you want to, as close as you want to. With that. And so whenever I think about what's mine, what's theirs, what's God's, those are 3 lanes that we have in life that if we can learn how to navigate those properly, then we will really worry less, love more, and get things done. And so what that focuses in on is I need to control what's mine, influence what's theirs, and accept what's God's. Control, influence, and accept. I call that the CIA. I always say, you need to know the CIA because the CIA knows you. So you want to control what's mine, influence what's theirs, accept what's God's. But what I so often do is kind of deny or ignore what's mine, fixate now on what belongs to other people, and really try to argue with God about the things that he ultimately gets to decide. And whenever that happens, much like when somebody swerves out of their lane in heavy traffic, you get a crash and you get a traffic jam. Whenever I start living in places I should not live, focused on things I should not focus on, you have crashes and you have life jams. And so those are kind of the 3 lanes of life that we want to focus in on and to make sure we're controlling what's mine, influencing what's theirs, and accepting what's God's.
That's so good. It's really just owning, like you said, what we can control and not picking up other people's baggage or driving in their lane. And I was thinking about this. Kevin, do you have any recent examples or any examples that maybe would just kind of paint a picture of a real life application of driving in a wrong lane, or an example? I know you gave a few in the book that were really good.
Every day. I mean, that's the funny thing is my wife will remind me on occasion, didn't you write? And then
Oh,
fill in
no.
the blank here with this concept. And it's true of other people. But even, Michelle and Ryan, you and we're in similar situations. We both have 18-year-old Ellas. And so within that, when a child is born, everything is in either the what's mine column or the what's God's column. They own nothing. But then about the age of 1.5, 2, they start taking some responsibility and they learn the word no. And we start handing over to them some aspects of control of their own life. They make their own choices. If you were to ask my kids when they were little, what's the most common statement your dad makes? It's that good choices lead to good consequences, bad choices lead to bad consequences. I was trying to help them understand how to take agency over their own life. Well, at 18, and my daughter has Down syndrome, it's not always exactly clear what decisions does she need to make, which ones do I need to make. And so even right now, where she was just accepted into a college program at UC Davis, and we're trying to figure out what is it that she can own, what do we need to own. And that's a continual struggle whenever you parent a child with special needs. It's a continual struggle whenever you parent anybody. And so even this past week, just trying to consider, okay, whose column does that belong in? And I'm not real sure. But just knowing the columns kind of helps frame the conversation between me and Jenny and trying to figure out how to parent well.
That's really good.
Yeah, I think it's so good, and there's a little excerpt in the book that I think so many people, I think right now, have worry. I mean, they carry this, and there's a little excerpt in here. Worry is a treadmill whose only outcome is to wear us out while leaving us in the exact same spot in which we started. And I think that's so true of where people are. And I love this concept of just breaking it down to those 3 lanes. Mm-hmm. What's mine? What's theirs? What's God's?
Yeah.
And Ryan, you think about the concept of worry. Here's the deception of worry. It feels like work. And so it feels like we're actually doing something about it. But generally speaking, worry is us exerting energy in a lane that is not ours. And so worry is I'm debating with God over an outcome that ultimately he controls. Worry is I'm trying to figure out how can I get other people to do what I want them to do, because if they would just do what I want them to do, their lives and my life would be better. You don't actually worry about things that you are controlling. Why? Because you're acting on them. And yet worry does exhaust you, so it feels like you're doing something. But the treadmill analogy is important. Why? Because worry leaves you in the same spot where you started, whereas work actually moves you into some direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with a mom in the neighborhood, and I used your example. It was kind of along the lines of her kid was almost being put to be emotionally responsible for the emotions of another child. And I just said, hey, look, this is a boundary issue. This is a lane issue. It's our job to help our kids be kind, be nice, be polite to other kids, but ultimately your child cannot be responsible for the emotions of another child. And it feels freeing to realize, like, okay, I can act this way. I need to be responsible and kind and all the things, all the fruits of the Spirit, but gentle, patient, but I can't control their response, and I can't tiptoe around doing things in such a way because I'm worried about if they're sad or happy. And you gave some of those examples in the book.
No, absolutely. And I mean, think about, and I'm not here to heap guilt on anybody. We've all made our parenting mistakes, but think about something as simple as when your child is little saying something like this, you're making mom or dad angry.
Mm.
Okay, what you're doing in that moment is you're telling the child that my emotions belong to you. You better take care of them. Well, that's the wrong lane. That's the wrong column. Now, you can help the child see how their behavior is wrong, how it has negative impact on other people, all those kinds of things. But if you're not very careful, you can actually unintentionally send the wrong message that you control my emotions, you control my happiness. And it's one way that we end up with a good number of people who end up being people pleasers because we're training them that they're actually meant to please us instead of here's why obedience is important. Here's how it makes your life better. I mean, think about it earlier, the idea of good choices lead to good consequences, right? Bad choices, bad consequences, to where you're teaching them to have agency over their own life. That's a key phrase or a key word within the book, is that idea of agency. We all desire some control over our own lives. We need that. It's a basic need that we actually have. Dan Siegel would say, he's a psychiatrist down at UCLA. He would say that there's basically three core needs of humanity, that we have a need for agency, a need for bonding, and a need for certainty. So agency, we kind of control aspects of our own lives. Bonding, we're in relationship with other people. And certainty, there is some kind of predictability of what is taking place. And he says whenever we don't get those, whenever we lack agency, it expresses itself as anger. Whenever we lack bonding, it expresses itself as sadness. And whenever we lack certainty, it expresses itself as fear. So take those three basic emotions with yourself, with your spouse, with your child. Whenever you see fear, then there's probably something unpredictable in their life that they don't know how to navigate. Whenever your child comes home sad from school, something probably happened with some relationship, either with their teacher or a classmate. Whenever you see anger, there's probably some aspect of their life where they feel out of control. So it's not unusual at all for an addict somebody has a hidden addiction, for them to have a temper that expresses itself. Well, what's going on? That addiction causes them to be out of control at some point of their life, and it's expressing itself now as anger. And so this issue of agency is vital, and we want to not only express it within our own lives, we want to empower other people to feel it in their lives. Because here's what's going on for many of our listeners today. They feel helpless or hopeless in some situation. And that helplessness and hopelessness is a feeling of lack of agency that is often a byproduct of them not controlling something that they actually can control.
I feel like that's great clarity. And I feel like if you're listening where you get the rewind 15-second option, like on Spotify, you need to hit that like 4 times and listen to that section again. That was really good, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fear, the anger, the sadness, and where those are coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. I part of, I think as we're talking about this, as we're talking about kids and as we're talking about parenting, I think this is such an interesting conversation. One, because I don't know, you hear it all the time. I mean, we hear this all the time. Oh, you have teenagers? Oh, and part of it's
we love our teenager.
We do, yes,
and she also
absolutely.
listens to this podcast, as does her boyfriend. So we love teenagers.
Right. But for a lot of people, it's a very trying season. And I think this is an important conversation. Maybe walk us through, Kevin, as you have teenagers, how does this shift happen, and how do you start to release that into, hey, that's theirs versus mine?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Michelle and Ryan, whenever you figure that out, you let me know, because it's a constant struggle. But I'm kind of like you from the standpoint of, you hear all the scary stories about teenagers. But seriously, I have a 15-year-old son right now, about to be 16. It is as fun as can possibly be at this moment. He is funny. He's engaging, right? He's witty, all those things. Our 18-year-old is great as well. No doubt there's challenges, but our experience has not been that the teenage years have been the most difficult. Here's what I would say to parents, just on that general topic, is the most difficult age of parenting is whatever age your child struggles the most, not necessarily what we see typical in society.
Sure.
But the question does become, every day we need to be handing things to them so that they are now in their column, so they are taking control. If for no other reason, we want them to begin to take control of aspects of their lives before they're on their own, while we are still there to influence them and encourage them in every way. And I always think about it in this way. Imagine you're driving down the road and you have a line that's a solid yellow line with a dashed yellow line. What does that mean? It means I can swerve into that lane, but that lane can't come over into my lane. And that's how I view kind of the teenage years, that between me and Silas, between me and Ella, there's a solid yellow line and a dash line. I get to step into their world. They don't necessarily get to dictate or to
Right.
step into mine. Now, a day's going to come in which, specifically with my son Silas, in which he becomes a man. That's going to become a solid yellow line that's double. And he's an adult, I'm an adult. There's boundaries of what can happen. I talk all the time. If your children are adults, you do not give them advice unless asked. That's not your business. You have to be invited into that. And let's face it, if I age the way I hope I do age, and that I live a long time, a day's going to come in which there's actually probably going to be a solid yellow line and a dash line, and he's going to be able to swerve into my life, whereas I can't necessarily
Yeah.
swerve into his, as tends to happen. And so I think it's just this idea of how can I every day, every year, be slowly passing things to them, let them see, let them feel the weight of this. My son's about to turn 16. I'm about to hand the car keys to him. Well, but here's the thing. If he doesn't handle that wisely, I'm going to take the car keys back.
Right.
And so it is this idea of we move it into their lane, see if they can handle it. If they can, then we give it to them, we encourage them, we move forward. But what we don't want to do is, one, we don't want to rush the process where we're putting expectations upon them that they're not, from a maturity standpoint, ready to handle. At the same time, we do not want a helicopter parent to where we're holding on to things that actually should already be theirs, because in so doing, we're actually stunting their growth and their own maturity.
Yeah, that's so good. Kevin, you had mentioned in this, I think in this similar topic, the question of consequences. And part of that taking away those consequences, and how that actually can stunt their growth. I mean, I think so much we want to protect as parents. You want to protect, but the importance of consequences.
Oh, no question. And the idea that those consequences have to go into their lane. What happens with so many parents is we don't want our kids to hurt, and rightfully so, but we can so quickly sweep in and take away what are the natural consequences of their choices. And what that then teaches the child is, one, they really don't have influence over their own lives or their own outcomes, or they don't see how their bad choices can actually lead to bad consequences. I've long said that from a parenting standpoint, one of the greatest tools that we have is to clarify the consequences before actions take place. And then whenever a kid makes a bad choice, just allow them to experience those bad consequences. You don't have to judge them. You don't have to discipline them. You can just say, oh, I'm so sorry, but whenever we do this, here's what's happened. And then you can walk alongside them and encourage them and support them, even as they are experiencing the negative consequences of their own choices. For a lot of parents, it puts them in a tough spot in that they don't have some clear house rules. They don't have clear consequences of when those rules are broken. And so they are then left to be a judge after everything happens, and it causes the child now to be a defense attorney, and the relationship can get very strained there, because let's face it, if we don't have a clear outcome of consequences of what's going to happen for basic things that we know probably will happen, then in that moment, it's left to how we feel. And so if we're in a good mood, there's not really any negative consequences. If we're in a bad mood, it can become extremely harsh. And that then teaches the child that life is unpredictable. And we never want to create that kind of communication with them. And so I think seriously, just go through your house, think about what are some things that we can expect at this age. And if your child does them or fails to do them, what are the consequences? And then just make them very clear. And when they happen, hold your child accountable to that. And I think it will ease many of the household tensions that we tend to experience.
That's great advice. You talked also about both responsibilities needing to go with privileges. Would you talk a little bit about that? Is that okay if I add that in?
Yeah.
So for the example of maybe you said, so Silas is going to be getting car keys pretty soon. That's a privilege. But then he also needs to have a responsibility to go with. Would you talk about those two going hand in hand?
Yeah. So anytime I get church or something, or I see a little kid who's having a birthday, I'll always ask them this question. Let's say a 7-year-old's turning 8. I'll always say, "Hey, what does an 8-year-old get to do that a 7-year-old doesn't get to do?" And it's just a sign. Hey, you're
Yeah,
changing. You get some fun things, but within that, there also becomes a question: What should an 8-year-old be responsible for that a 7-year-old doesn't have to be responsible for?
sure.
And so my son works at the church in our facilities. So he works some late nights and things like that. And so we had a barrier on his phone where his phone would turn off every night at 10 o'clock. Well, he wasn't getting off work till 10 o'clock. And so
Mhm.
he would get home and would have no ability to do the phone. And so he just said, "Hey, do you mind if that changes?" And I said, "No, you know what? I don't mind. Let's do this. I'm still in the process kind of waking you up regularly. You set an alarm and I will extend when your phone turns off as long as you get up and go to class every morning. And as long as you're not late, it'll be totally fine with me. If you are late, we'll go back to a different way." And so that was a privilege that was tied in with a responsibility. And whenever you merge those two things together, I think it's very empowering for a child.
Sure. That's
Yeah.
a great example.
Yeah.
Our son, actually, we'll give him a shout out. Thomas turns 9 years old tomorrow, and I feel like it's been just a quick, just flash in time, which is crazy. But we've done a little bit of that. We have given him an old iPhone, and he actually listens to podcasts and such on that phone. But there are clear boundaries, and for him, because he's so young, we actually went through a time where it even became a challenge to like win the day part. We were just having really high and low days, just really kind of dramatic. So we thought, you know what, we're going to break it up into 4-day parts: morning, afternoon, dinner time, which was a challenge. He's very picky eater, and then bedtime. And if you can win that day part, you get a sticker. And then he knows if he gets 4 stickers, he gets some screen time, stuff like that. But so privilege, but responsibility going with it.
You're empowering him in that moment to control his own outcomes. Again, you're teaching him agency, which is a beautiful thing, because one of the things we're doing as parents is we're teaching them, hey, there are going to be some things I'm not going to control in your life. You're going to control them. And so the faster we can assist kids to learn that, the better off we are, and they are.
That's so good. And I think I'm just thinking of what we did with, our teenager, just to give people a few examples for different ages and stages. But when our daughter got her cell phone, which we did wait a very long time. I think she was in 7th grade when she got a phone, and she just got Snapchat. Was it last year as a junior?
Last year.
She might have been the last student in her entire high school, maybe our entire city, that got Snapchat, like the last person on the face of this planet, maybe. But we had contracts, and we said, hey, we're totally cool with you having these, but why don't you draft up a contract with we're not gonna be legalistic. You put some good responsible behaviors, you own your lane, and then say what you think responsible phone ownership should look like, responsible social media, access should look like, and what some potential dangers might be, and what might happen if those, that we called it a circle of trust, if that's broken. So we did that with her, and we all, it was a little thing. We printed it off. We all signed it. And that was really great to have those expectations out there where it was very clear and she knew. And it was a privilege too, but also responsibility in that with her phone, she pays for part of it each month. So it's equal buy-in. And I don't know, I feel like that's worked really well for us. We talked about that on an earlier show, and we've even shared that contract with a few other parents, but that's been a really great thing for us. Just to give people ideas for because those are big things.
So, and I think probably the greatest application of this book that I've seen so far is actually parenting adult children.
Sure.
Is because what happens is our kids age, and sometimes we don't recognize it, and we keep on parenting in the same way that we always did. And so many parents today are struggling with adult children. And what happens is, when you think about it, as they take more and more control of their own lives and we have less and less control, the consequences of their decisions become astronomically important, and we have little say in it. And so often I see these rubs in relationships between parents and adult children because the parents are swerving into places they actually should not be. And so the whole stay in your lane model from birth all the way up into adult children is just a good reminder to pause, write it down, and say, all right, what is my role here? And sometimes your role is far less than what you actually want it to be.
Yeah, there's an example in the book that I can think of just off the top of my head here of about, as you have adult children who are growing up and looking for a spouse. And there's a spot in the book that I laughed just because you need to make sure your input on that decision is asked, but very, very specifically, like, is that your lane and should you be speaking into that?
Yeah, great examples in the book. Definitely our listeners need to pick it up.
Yeah.
Very practical. So good.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, as we wrap up here, anything additional that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think, there's a whole marriage play on this as well. We've taken it parenting, and rightly so. But I think about the marriage aspect. There's multiple ways that you can look at this. One, I can write this chart out as what's mine, what's Jenny's, and what's God's. And so whenever I think about who I am as a husband is totally under my control, and I have to choose my own attitude, the effort I put in, who I am as a man, all of those things are that I bring to the table. And then Jenny has to choose who she's going to be as a spouse. And then God ultimately gets so many of the big decisions of life. And then there's another way to draw the chart, and that is what is mine is actually what is ours. What belongs to me and Jenny? And then what belongs to other people, what's theirs, and then what's God's. I think about this, there's a carpool lane on the interstate from here into San Francisco, and I can only get in that carpool lane if somebody else is in the car with me. And so there are some decisions in marriage that I can only make if Jenny and I are making the decision together. There are other things that, I get to make a choice, she gets to influence, she gets to make a choice, I get to influence. But there are certain decisions. We're not moving to California from Arkansas unless we're both in the car making that decision.
Right.
We're not making big expenditures decisions, life-changing decisions, many parenting decisions, unless we can't get in that lane unless we are together. And so I think to even take kind of stay in your lane and look at it from a marriage standpoint. Here's one reason I love marriage ministry and love what you guys are doing at Celebrate is this. Think about marriage itself. What lane is marriage itself in? For me and Jenny, it's in our lane. We get to fully determine the type of relationship that she and I have. Nobody else can influence it. Nobody else can make it bad. She and I together. Now, one of us can make foolish choices, no doubt, and hinder the relationship. But as long as she and I are working on this together, our relationship totally belongs to us. And in this world where we control so little, and at times we can feel so helpless, that is one area of life in which I want to see couples take full agency back. The state of your relationship, how much you love one another, how connected you feel to each other, the amount of friction that is there, the blessings that you are to other people, that is totally under your control. And yet so many couples now deny and overlook the control they have on the outcome of their own relationship and actually begin to outsource it to other people, to culture, to just the state of drift. And anytime you outsource something that you should control, you're not going to like the outcome. And so if you'll take it back, if you'll do the work, you can have a relationship you can't even begin to dream of, because in the end, whatever relationship you and your spouse have is totally dependent upon you and your spouse.
Yeah. That is so good. That is so good. We were just talking about this the other night. We were on a walk and we were just talking about this on how you have control over that. Whether it doesn't matter what you came from or what you had modeled. I understand that it's hard and that if that's what was modeled for you, I understand that it's difficult, but you do have a choice. It doesn't have to be what it's always been. You can control that 100%.
Oh, absolutely. And think about for a second. I mean, we haven't talked much about accepting what's God's. What does that even mean? It sounds so passive, and I don't mean for it to sound passive at all. I use the illustration in the book about improv comedy, right? Whose line is it anyway? And so all of that is built on one basic rule. It's just whatever another character introduces into the scene, you have to accept it and then build on it. It's called the rule of acceptance. It's not the rule of agreement. It's not, hey, I totally agree. That's the exact thing that you need to do to enter into the scene. No, it's just acceptance. I'm going to accept it and move on. And there are some things that God allows in our lives that we don't understand, things that are beyond our control, the global economy, a diagnosis within our own lives, decisions our kids make. But what happens is we so often get stuck in life because we don't have the ability to accept this is reality. Now, how can I build on it? How can I now play the hand that life has dealt me, that God has allowed to be dealt to me? And what acceptance looks like to me is actually this very active kind of approach to life, which is, okay, this has come my way. Now let's move forward. I don't remember if I tell the story in the book or not. I don't think I do. But our daughter with Down syndrome, born 18 years ago, right? We didn't know she had Down syndrome at the time. Doctor comes in after her birth, gives the diagnosis, and then leaves. And I walk over. And so these are going to be the first words of my wife after the birth of our first child, now having this diagnosis. And Jenny looks at me and says, well, this is a road we never would have chosen to go down, but I bet you we never regret going down it. Mm-hmm. And so what she's doing in that moment is in faith now, opening her hands to God and saying, we don't control this. We can't even influence this. You and your divine sovereignty have allowed this. This is for our good. It's for your glory. And now we're going to accept it and we're going to get to work. We're going to start building on it. And you have listeners that, they want to be in relationships and they're not. You have relationships that have gone bad, that divorce has taken place, children have rebelled, all those things. Well, in the end, accept what God has allowed, open your hands and receive it, and now start to build on it. Now, whenever you do that, you really get unstuck in life. But for as long as you kind of have closed fists and you can't accept this new reality, which you really can't change, that's how we get stuck in life. It's an amazing thing to me about kind of the New Testament. Love is never really boring. The challenge to love people, to figure out what love looks like here, what's the most loving thing to do, it is a constant state of energy and flurry. And so when you and I will accept what God has chosen and try to build on it, all we're having to do is try to figure out, how do we love in response to this situation? And that causes constant movement and specifically movement forward. Mm-hmm. Yet whenever we fail to accept, oftentimes we also fail to love.
That's so good. My eyes are getting a little watery. Just that's, I think it's so freeing once you move to acceptance, because then you can focus on living and not in that, the book shared, that bitterness or that anger of things that you can't control anyways. And I think we shared a little bit with our listeners about, what a tough couple of weeks had been. And I feel like the reading of this book was so perfect. Just with, and we can share now, but my mom, essentially within the last weeks, we found out that she has cancer. And then a couple of days later, we found out, yes, it's breast cancer, but it's also stage 4. And as we were reading the book, I just thought, I can't control any of this. I can't control what's been done. I can't control what's happening, but it's God's. And what treatment she chooses, what she selects, that's hers. But what I can control is how I show up as a daughter, how we show up as a family to support her, what we do with our time going forward, how we intentionally live and make choices. We should always live as if we don't know about tomorrow, but intentionally do that. I don't think I've cried on the show in all of our episodes, not like this. But just that's my choice. I can show up for her and I can be intentional and present. And I don't want to waste time being angry or any of that, because that's not in my control, but how I choose to show up is. So the Michelle, timing of this is really good.
That's a beautiful description of exactly what I hope the book does. Is it gives you a framework to navigate things that you don't have experience with, and things that can feel like there's no way forward.
Yeah.
And it shows you, it doesn't take away your pain or your grief. Hopefully it actually allows you to experience it in a healthy way, but not to get stuck in it at the exact same time. And to hear you describe so beautifully all these things that you do control, that you can move forward with, even while you're dealing with these things that you don't have control over. That's exactly what we're hoping for. And I'm grateful for your experience and sharing that with the listeners.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this great resource. And for our listeners, I really hope that that you pick it up. Let's talk about where can they get your book, Kevin, and where can they follow along with you? Because this is such, like you said, it's a short book. It's so practical. And I love that it focuses on this one really concept, because sometimes you read something and you get done. And we've talked about that, Ryan. You're like, I've read so many books, but then at the end of the day, I don't know what I'm actually doing. This is a book that you can actually very easily implement. So where can they get it?
Yeah, the easiest place to get it, obviously, is Amazon. Just search Stay in Your Lane. If they go to changetheodds.com, not only can they find the book there, but then we have a 4-week Bible study that goes with it that has just 12-minute videos for each of those 4 weeks. It's great in small group. You can do it individually as well.
Cool.
But it's just good to get in a room with other people to, Michelle, hear the very experience that you just shared, because as we hear other people applying it into their lives, it helps us apply it to our own as well. So that's changetheodds.com or available at Amazon.
That's cool. I didn't know about the Bible study part. So that's super cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Kevin, this conversation has been so good, and we thank you for coming on. And with all of our guests, we like to ask kind of 3 rapid-fire questions. First one, what is your marriage why? Why is marriage important to you?
I think marriage is just bigger than us. And so I think ultimately it's a pathway of transformation for me to know God and to make him known to other people. It's not the only one by any means, but it's one that he's chosen to allow me to experience. And so for me, marriage is much bigger than just me and Jenny.
Yeah.
We have a very similar why.
Yeah.
Just seeing how God's used us for more than we ever could have imagined. Yeah, That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Great answer.
Number 2, best date night.
Best individual date night or best date night like in general?
Either one or both.
Yeah.
So I think one of the funniest dates that we've ever had that was great is our kids were little, and one day Jenny got rear-ended in a car accident, and it was clearly the other guy's fault, and we didn't think a thing about it. Nobody was really that hurt until he contested his ticket, which means that she had to go testify in a traffic court. And so she asked if I would come with her. I said I'd be happy to come with her. So we show up to traffic court. And the way they do traffic court in Arkansas is everybody has to be there at the start of the day. And then they try all the other cases and put traffic court at the end of the day.
Oh, no. This is torture.
They don't want you contesting tickets.
Right.
And so we sat there side by side. Of course, you're not allowed cell phones or anything like that. We sat there side by side and kind of talked and whispered and got in trouble by the bailiff and all those things. And so finally the time came for her case. She got up on the stand. She testified. This guy had watched like every Matlock and Perry Mason and Boston Legal ever imaginable. And he thought he was being so smart in how he was defending his case. And finally the judge, very kind, had enough and said, "Sir, were you behind Miss Thompson when the accident occurred? And did you hit her? Yes, you're guilty." And then it's like a $200 fine or whatever. But we walked out of there that day. And Jenny said, "That was so much fun."
Aww.
And I said, "I know, but our kids were little. We didn't have a lot of time together. They were in school that day, and it just gave us some time together." So one of my favorite dates ever was traffic court.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
So good. Do you have a general one then? You said you had 2 in mind. Do you have a different one too? That's amazing. Hopefully people don't get rear-ended to have that though. You can do that with anything. Just find something special in the middle of the mundane.
Right.
Yeah, a general one for me would be if it's night specifically, find a place where you can go to dinner and after dinner go for a nice walk where there's people. You know, Jenny and I's first date ever was actually in downtown Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And we went to dinner and then we walked around downtown for several hours. And just the activity, it's far better than a movie, in my opinion. I think the activity, and here's one thing for your listeners to realize, specifically, if their husbands tend not to talk a lot, men generally do not talk face to face. We talk side by side. in a golf cart together, in a fishing boat, and a duck blind, and all those things. And so one way to get men to talk more is don't be face to face with them like in a booth across from them. Instead, go for a walk, go for a drive, and that oftentimes relaxes them and doesn't make them as afraid or as tense. And many times they will open up better.
That's a great tip.
That is a great tip. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's true for us. That's a great tip. That's so true.
All right. And then lastly, Kevin, what's bringing you joy in your marriage right now?
I think at 24 years, there is just such a trust and an excitement of where we are, of what's going on. I'm not trying to brag at all, but a couple months ago, a person just said that they wanted a relationship like mine and Jenny's, which is a great honor. And Jenny made a statement. They see the relationship for what it is now. They don't see the 24 years of work that's gone into it. And I think in so many ways we're living off of the compounding returns of 24 years of doing the best we can, of trusting God, of forgiving, of loving. And so I think that's just a great source of joy at this moment.
Awesome.
So beautiful. I love what you said. Ryan, you're in the financial industry, and that I feel like that makes so much sense. The compounding returns of all those daily actions.
Yeah.
Kevin, thank you so much again for being on our show today. We will post those links in the show notes below. And thank you also to Jenny for encouraging you and prompting you to write the book, because it's such a great resource. And thank you to our listener for joining us today on the Celebrate MarriageCast. If you would like additional help or marriage resources, visit celebrate.church/marriage. Additionally, we will love to hear your takeaways from today's show or any testimonials from the podcast in general. You can leave us a message on our Celebrate MarriageCast voicemail. You don't talk to anyone, it's just a voicemail, 605-951-0110, or text that number, 605-951-0110. And Kevin, I think you're coming back for 5 Minute Friday, correct?
Sounds good. I'll be there.
Okay, sounds good. So have a great week, and we will talk to you again on Friday.